Hi, Misha here, and we've talked about the clones from the Clone Wars and Star Wars, so it only seems fair to talk about some clankers. And to begin with, I wanted to talk about how the Force was landed, basically. Beginning with the Lucrehulk converted freighter here, to the C9979 dropship, to the multi-troop transport, the MTT. This is pretty much how they got from space to the surface of a planet, or sometimes other body in space, because in Star Wars, we don't have transporters. That's why I think if there was ever a Star Wars versus Star Trek thing, transporters would be huge. Then again, Star Wars ships are a lot faster, so... These are all from the Titanium series. They're actually from 1999 when Micro Machines did the first metal ones, really before Hasbro took over and all that. So they're from the Phantom Menace. There's some good and bad to that. But yeah, let's just jump in. Why not? On to the spinny thingy. The Lucrehulk battleship, carrier, freighter. These actually started off as trade ships, as freighters. They were LH3210 cargo freighters. They could carry 5 million plus tons. And they existed for decades before the invasion of Naboo and 32 BBY. And they started off as legitimate freighters for the Trade Federation. They were pretty lightly defended with 40 some odd quad laser cannons, just, point defense type things. But they were quite big, so there wasn't really enough to cover them. They were just under 3,200 meters long, so that's actually longer than a Borg cube, and just over 3,000 meters wide, still a little bit wider than a Borg cube. But they were shorter at about 1,000 meters tall, all included. They had main and secondary engines here in the back. 3 main ones, and then a total of 4 secondary. They could nominally go in an atmosphere because of repulsors and all that stuff, but they was slow, about 500 kilometers per hour. So yeah, like a World War II prop. They were relatively well armored and quite well shielded. The outer ring was for cargo and docking. The inner area was for the crew and meeting areas, the bridge, and the power source. And that's pretty much it. Before the invasion of Naboo, the Trade Federation did start to convert some of theirs over into warships, only about 10% of the fleet, although right around Naboo, as many as 1/3 of the fleet. And this time, all they really did, they converted some to be droid control ships. Others were converted to carry various, implements of war for invasions. They were meant for blockading and what have you. And as famously known in Episode 1, one of these served as a droid control ship as well. Because that was smart to have all your droids tied to one ship. They did not have a large crew. In fact, they could operate with as few as 25 organics and 150 command control droids, although sometimes they would have 350 crew, a mix of both. And they could support up to 100,000 passengers. Or, later on, over 300,000 B-1 battle droids and stowed in active positions. They would also carry about 1,500 Vulture fighters, which we looked at a long time ago, and we should probably revisit again sometime soon. And they could carry either 1,500 standard transports, shuttles, what have you, or about 550 of the MTTs, and they could carry 50 of the larger C9979s. They could, carry a wide range of things. Again, they could deploy fighters and whatnot. Obviously, they were used to blockade Naboo for a month, but that was pushed off. Afterwards, the Republic ordered the Trade Federation to dismantle them. They pretended like they were doing it, but they actually started to upgrade the ships, installing heavier shielding, some more armor, and more advanced weapons, and this was kicked into high gear once the Trade Federation joined the CIS Navy, the Separatist Navy, which began the Clone Wars in 22 BBY. This wartime upgraded version of the Lucrehulk had 3 heavy turbo lasers, increased quadra lasers, long-ranged laser cannon, and point defense lasers, plus again upgraded shields and armor. It was a true battleship. It wasn't fast or terribly maneuverable, but it was a good blockader. It was also good for delivering supplies, troops, that kind of thing. And it took multiple Venator Star Destroyers to usually take one of these out. So they were a tough nut to crack. They served throughout the Clone Wars. Pretty much the primary capital ship, the most common capital ship of the Separatists. After the war ended in 19 BBY, the Empire would take a few and use them as mobile flight instructing schools. Some were sold off to friendly groups to the Empire. Others ended up in the hands of kind of third parties, pirate groups, or just unaligned security forces. And some ended up in the hands of separatist holdout groups. And of course that led some to being in the early rebellion. And if you would serve even as X-Wing carriers. So this toy / model, it's almost all metal, which is neat. It does have fold down landing gear. Early on they almost all did. And kind of one neat feature, it has a little ship that comes out of the docking bay. Now this is actually a Republic cruiser, but we can pretend like it's a C997 dropship, because that would be how they would be dropped off. Essentially there was a big carousel system that rotated cargo and ships in and out, and they flew from here. So with that, like I said, it had 50 of the dropships, so when it was time to invade, it would start sending them down. And with that, let's talk about that vessel. The C9979 dropship, sometimes called the Trade Federation drop craft, a separatist drop craft. This was designed for exactly that role. Whereas the Lucrehulk could operate in space for up to 2 years, maybe even longer if it was carrying extra supplies, this really only had enough power and energy to operate for about a day independently. And default, it did not have a hyperdrive, although there would be a special carrier version that may have had a hyperdrive. Hard to say. No, it was meant to convey lots of cargo from an orbiting ship down to a planet, and it did that quite well. This is not a small vessel. It's about 210 meters long, 370 meters wide with the wings, and about 120 meters tall with the landing pedestal. Now these wings aren't just there for winging, they actually are the main storage. Kind of like how the Lucrehulk has a carousel system to rotate these for launch. They have a system that rotates and moves cargo around from the wings to the deployment zone here in the front. And the wings are rather heavy. In fact, they need repulsors and tensor fields to keep them from collapsing. And when they're on board the ship, they're actually dismantled. This also makes loading them on the ship easier too. These do have shields, but again, no hyperdrive. And they carry quite a large number. They carry about 114 AAT, which are assault tanks. They carry 28 standard, behind the lines PAC, which are transports, and they carry 11 MTTs, the multi-troop transport, plus a few other odds and ends. They don't have a very large crew. When they're fully automated, they usually have 88 droids operating them, typically OOM or series battle droids. If an organic crew is operating it, there's a few more, usually about 140. But for the size, yeah, it's pretty automated. They do have some basic defenses. There are laser cannons on the wingtips, and there are turreted, and those basically fire forward, and there are twin turreted lasers here and here. So most of the defense is forward pointing, although of course the turrets can point rear. The carrier version is very similar, except it carries vulture droids or bombers like the Hyena. But primarily we see these deploying ground forces. And they were used in large numbers for the Battle of Naboo. Of course, before the Trade Federation militarized, these would be great for cargo transports and other things. But afterwards they, were upgunned. And they typically operated in groups of 3, meaning that they could deliver quite a bit in one go. But they could also be quite vulnerable to starfighters. They weren't very fast. They were slightly faster than the Lucrehulk at about 600 kph. But yeah, not much more than that. And not being able to skip to hyperspace if needed too. After the occupation, the blockade of Naboo, these of course would enter into the CIS, becoming their primary Separatist dropship, and they would be used throughout the war, including delivering hundreds of millions of B-1 battle droids for the invasion of Coruscant, the strike on it in 19 BBY. Afterwards, though, because of their somewhat unique design and specialist design and somewhat high cost of operation, you don't really see these used much during the Empire, either by the Empire itself or by rebellions and separatist groups, because, there wasn't really a thing. I have to say, though, this is probably one of my favorites of this series. Tight there. And they're kind of hard to find today. I'm not sure why. It's actually a good size, and these wings are all metal. You might think they'd be plastic, but no, metal. Even the foot's metal. And these turrets actually do rotate. Kind of neat for what it's worth. And maybe neatest of all, this front door opens up both sides. My one side's a little stiff. And not only does the front door open up, but it even has a tiny little MTT coming out there, showing you how they would leave. And it would kind of land and deploy. But once on the ground, these didn't do a lot of good. So with that, let's move to our third member today. The MTT, Multi-Troop Transport. This is a repulsor craft, but it's not a tank. The tank was the AAT. This was, to deliver troops, sure. But it could also act as a battering ram, a bulldozer, and it could use its blasters to support the troops once deployed. It is a good size. It's just about 36 meters long, just over 10.5 meters tall. And it's meant to have a relatively small silhouette, especially in the front, and it has reinforced armor in the front. We have 2 sets of blasters here, one on each side, and those are one heavy, one light each. On the top we have the cockpit, and in the back we have the power source and engines. Now, even though this toy/model has wheels, this was actually a repulsor craft, and it would float up to 4 meters off the ground, although usually closer to the ground. And this would allow it to traverse a good bit of terrain, including swamps. That's about it. It's a blunt-nosed object, not especially fast, about 30 to 35 kph, depending on which exact version and variant. And the design was a modification of a cargo pod for, again, combat purposes. And it carried 2 pilots up here in the cockpit, typically 1 driver and 1 engineer / gunner. And then in the main hull, it had a commander / supervisor and a rack operator / cargo manager, kind of like you'd see in a helicopter. And its main thing was it carried B-1 battle droids, up to 112 standard versions, 100 infantry types, 10 security types, and 2 commander types. Although later versions could carry droidkas or even super battle droids B2s, although if that, it could only carry about 20 droidkas or only 12 super battle droids, because the little B1s were very compact, and that was with standard blasters. The what was it, the E5 they used, so light infantry as it were. It did not have shielding as such, just armor, but it did have short-range sensors for use on the battlefield, and these were designed to support troops and also push through ray shields and things of that nature. And typically, the commander and pilot were series droids as well. And that's about all to say about it. These were used on Naboo. About 33 were used to occupy Theed, which when you consider each one had over 100 droids, well, yeah, that's about 3,400 droids. But I'll be honest, this is kind of my least favorite, although I like it, of the batch. During the Clone Wars, the CIS would use these in large numbers, including an upgraded version known as the Heavy MTT. And yet again, these would be for the Battle of Coruscant. And they would receive the CIS colors, the kind of gray and blue, versus the original Trade Federation colors. After the Clone Wars, many would be converted for transporting organics or cargo, and would appear in various hands because these were kind of everywhere, and it was just a blunt object. And this toy / model is, again, very metal, very heavy. Even the blaster cannons are metal. The underside has some plastic, including little wheels. There's 3 wheels, so it'll roll. Probably its neatest feature is this little deploying rack of B-1 droids. This front hatch is armored, and this rack would extend out. It was a radial rotating rack. It would essentially drop deactivated droids onto the battlefield, and they would be sent an activation code from orbit from a Lucrehulk cruiser and immediately go into use. After it had exhausted its 100 plus droids, or 12 if it was the B2s, the craft would use its guns to help them support in the battlefield. Not very smart critters, the droids. They were numerous and cheap, and well, they were loyal. So that's how we got them on the battlefield. So back where we started, the Lucrehulk would carry 50 of these landing craft, dropships, and these would carry 11 of these MTTs, and the MTTs would carry a standard load of 112 B-1 battle droids, meaning that this progression gives us a total of 61,600 battle droids deployed. Now that's not all. There were other transports like the PAC and other things and other transport craft on board, but this is kind of the front line. And that is how these guys got on the battlefield. we've looked at the Black Series clones. Next time, we'll talk about the B1 battle droids and their E5 blasters, and the goods and the bads of them. Just having fun. It's worth saying that all of these appeared in The Phantom Menace for the first time, and they were all inspired by George Lucas to some degree. The Lucrehulk was kind of inspired by a 1950s flying saucer, but they cut out the middle and they gave it some engines on the back to make it a little more distinctive and Star Warsy, plus kind of taking this bite out of the front. The Dropship was inspired by a dragonfly. Seems pretty obvious. And the MTT was actually inspired by an elephant, with these guns kind of being considered dual trunks. I guess you could also say they're kind of like a tusk. There's kind of a animal vibe, including even with the B1 droid, very insectoid. Which would make sense considering a lot of this stuff was designed in part by the Geonosians. But yeah, we'll talk about that next time. I know this isn't the most interesting topic for me too, but over the years I've kind of learned to enjoy the Separatist stuff. It's more creative than what we've seen in more recent films at any rate. And these toys/models are just an extension of Micro Machine, but made of metal and a lot bigger. And they were a lot of fun to pick up over the years because they were quite inexpensive. $9-10 usually. So let me know what you think. With that, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon. Next time.